You are already seated when the engine begins to speak, not in words, but in vibrations that travel through the metal frame, through the harness across your chest, through your bones until your heartbeat starts to synchronize with the aircraft. The cockpit is tighter than memory allows. Every switch, every display, every warning light exists within a geometry you now understand more intuitively than your own reflection. You do not feel trapped, you feel contained. Containment in this world is safety. The canopy closes with a mechanical certainty that feels irreversible. For a moment, you see your own faint reflection in the curved glass, a ghostly double layered over the runway lights. You barely recognize the person staring back. Years ago, you imagined this moment as triumph. Now it feels more like transition. There is a subtle but permanent difference between dreaming of flight and realizing that flight can lead into war. The checklist flows from your mind without friction. Oxygen system verified, flight controls responsive, radar calibrated, weapons armed but silent, like restrained potential. Each confirmation is not just a technical step, it is a psychological narrowing. Every completed task removes another piece of the civilian world from your awareness. You stop thinking about conversations, plans, the rhythm of ordinary days. You begin thinking only in terms of altitude, velocity, vector. Outside the aircraft, the desert stretches endlessly, a landscape so vast it feels detached from human intention. The airbase itself appears temporary, like a structure built from urgency rather than permanence. Heat shimmers above the asphalt, distorting the silhouettes of other jets waiting their turn to ascend. The war is not visible here. It exists in briefings, in encrypted messages, in the tension that lingers in the pauses between radio calls. 5 years earlier, you were running drills at dawn, while the sky was still undecided between night and morning. Training was repetition disguised as progress. You memorized procedures until they became instinct. You studied aerodynamic theory, while others pursued careers that promised stability. At the time, the commitment felt abstract. You believed you were preparing for excellence. You did not yet understand you were preparing for consequence. The first time you saw the F-15 up close, it seemed less like a machine and more like a declaration. Twin vertical stabilizers cutting into the sky like punctuation marks. Engines designed not for efficiency but dominance. Standing beneath its wings, you sensed both privilege and obligation. Flying such an aircraft meant becoming part of a system that extended far beyond personal ambition. It meant accepting that your decisions would ripple outward in ways you might never fully comprehend. Now, clearance arrives through your headset. A voice filtered through protocol and distance. You acknowledge with brevity. Words are currency here, and excess is wasteful. The throttle advances. Acceleration compresses your awareness into a narrow tunnel where only motion matters. At the moment of liftoff, gravity relinquishes its authority. You do not feel exhilaration. You feel alignment, as if every previous step in your life has led precisely to this trajectory. Climbing through layers of atmosphere, you realize how quickly perspective dissolves. Cities become patterns, borders become suggestions. The narratives that dominate headlines reduce to coordinates and probabilities. Yet within this abstraction lies an undeniable reality. Somewhere beyond the horizon, there are individuals who view you not as a pilot, but as a symbol, a presence, a potential threat. Training taught you how to maneuver, how to survive, how to execute. It did not teach you how to carry the knowledge that your existence in this sky represents the intersection of politics, history, and human fear. That burden arrives gradually, accumulating with each mission briefing, each sortie flown over contested airspace. You learn to compartmentalize, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Your first operational assignment does not involve combat. It involves vigilance, escorting reconnaissance flights, maintaining air superiority, demonstrating presence. These tasks lack cinematic drama, yet they demand relentless concentration. Every radar contact must be evaluated. Every deviation from expected patterns could signal escalation. You begin to understand that modern warfare is often defined by what does not happen. Deterrence is invisible. Success is measured in tensions that never ignite. Still, the possibility of sudden conflict hovers like a storm that refuses to dissipate. As the coastline fades beneath you and open water replaces land, the silence in the cockpit deepens. Instruments glow softly, casting pale reflections across your visor. The radio crackles with coded updates. Each transmission reinforces a simple truth. You are no longer training for scenarios. You are living within them. This realization does not arrive as fear. It arrives as clarity. The life you once knew has not ended. It has been recontextualized. You have become part of a continuum where personal identity merges with operational necessity. And somewhere ahead, beyond the curvature of the Earth, lies the moment that will define whether all this preparation was merely theoretical or irrevocably real. The silence of the sky is never absolute, even when nothing is visible but scattered clouds and a distant horizon. An invisible layer of expectation accompanies every second of flight. You quickly learn that the real tension doesn't arise in the moment of confrontation, but in the space before it. That uncertain interval where anything can happen and nothing has yet happened. The radar begins to register movements that were not foreseen in the initial route. Small electronic signals appear and disappear like nerve pulses. The air traffic control operator transmits fragmented information, confirming only the essentials. The language is economical, laden with implications. There is no room for emotion in the communications, only data, coordinates, and instructions. You adjust altitude, respond to calls, maintain focus on each instrument. The cockpit becomes an extension of your mind. Each flashing light represents a possibility. Each change in the radio tone suggests a shift in the invisible balance that sustains the mission. There are no visible enemies, only the perception that the environment can transform from one instant to the next. The training that once seemed exhausting now proves insufficient to prepare for the psychological impact of uncertainty. Simulations had limits. Here, there is no pause. There is no reset button. What you decide now will resonate beyond your own survival. The formation with other fighters maintains a calculated distance. You are not just flying together, you are building a strategic presence. The aircraft ceases to be merely a means of transport. It becomes a silent message sent to the airspace you patrol. A reminder that greater forces are watching, ready to act. During a brief moment of stability, you look at the panel and realize how distorted time seems. Minutes stretch like hours. Hours disappear like seconds. Perception fragments. There is only the continuous now, a sequence of decisions that need to be made without the guarantee of complete understanding. When the first serious alert arises, there is no cinematic drama, no music, no visible explosions, just a technical signal indicating that something in the environment has changed. Perhaps it's an unidentified aircraft, perhaps a defense system activated in distant territory. The exact reason doesn't matter at that moment. What matters is the response. You follow the protocols with precision. The voice on the radio confirms your reading. The chain of command remains intact, even thousands of kilometers away. This invisible structure sustains every movement. Without it, the flight would be nothing but chaos. The body reacts before the mind can formulate complete questions. Controlled breathing, firm muscles. Training transforms anxiety into coordinated action. Yet, there is an almost imperceptible instant when you recognize the real risk. Not as a concept, but as a concrete possibility. The sky remains seemingly serene. The sun reflects off the fuselage, creating momentary flashes that could be mistaken for anything. You realize that modern warfare rarely manifests as immediate direct confrontation. It unfolds in layers, in subtle signals, in strategic decisions made long before the first shot is fired. When the mission is completed and the aircraft returns to safe airspace, you feel an internal shift that is difficult to describe. It's not pure relief. It's not absolute pride. It's a complex mix of awareness and responsibility. The experience cannot be fully shared with those who haven't lived through something similar. At the base, the landing feels heavier than expected. Gravity resumes its hold, reminding you that each flight is just a chapter in a larger narrative. As the systems shut down, true silence finally settles in. It's not comforting, it's reflective. You realize something has changed within you. The first contact with real tension leaves no visible marks, but it alters how you perceive each future mission. From that moment on, the concept of combat ceases to be theoretical. It becomes a permanent possibility, present in every takeoff. And you understand that the real challenge isn't just facing the danger. It's learning to live with the expectation of it, day after day, without losing the clarity necessary to keep flying. The day begins like any other. That's the first lie war tells those who live within it. You arrive at the hangar before sunrise. The air is still cold, heavy with the metallic smell of fuel and damp concrete. Technicians walk silently around the aircraft, executing routines with the precision of those who understand that every detail can mean the difference between return and absence. There is no dramatization in their gestures, only discipline. The briefing is longer than usual. Additional information emerges in layers, each one increasing the complexity of the mission. Changes in the behavior of air defense systems, unconfirmed movements in certain regions, reports suggesting a more unstable environment than in previous weeks. No one directly says that the risk has increased. It's not necessary. The atmosphere of the room communicates this by itself. When you put on your flight suit, you realize that the ritual has acquired a different meaning. Before, it was preparation. Now it's transformation. The fabric fitted to the body acts as a symbolic boundary between the individual and the role they play. You don't cease to be who you were, but the job begins to dominate your every thought. Takeoff occurs under a clear sky, almost ironically tranquil in its visual sense. The aircraft responds perfectly, as always. The F-15 doesn't question political contexts or interpret strategic reports. It simply executes. The responsibility of interpreting the scenario remains entirely with you. For the first few minutes, the mission proceeds as expected. Stable formation, clear communications, systems operating without anomalies. The feeling of routine returns, bringing with it a false sense of security. You know, however, that this feeling can disappear in an instant. The first indication of change emerges as a subtle alteration in the data flow. A distant contact appears on the radar, initially classified as potentially neutral. Identification takes longer than usual. This, in itself, is enough to raise the level of attention. Communications become more frequent, not chaotic, but dense. Each message carries an additional layer of urgency. You adjust course, maintaining the recommended distance while assessing the contact's behavior. There is no explicit hostility, but neither is there confirmation of neutrality. It's the kind of ambiguity that demands precise decisions. The airspace, once vast and seemingly empty, now appears compressed. Every kilometer takes on strategic importance. You realize how the notion of territory transforms when observed from altitude. Imaginary lines defined by agreements and disputes become concrete operational boundaries. Then comes the most significant alert up to that point. A system detects something that wasn't present seconds before. The exact nature of the threat is not yet clear, but protocols are activated immediately. Training takes over. There is no time for philosophical questioning or in-depth analysis. There is only the sequence of actions necessary to maintain the integrity of the mission and one's own survival. You feel the physical pressure increasing, not only from the gravitational forces involved in the maneuvers, but from the acute awareness that every movement is now monitored by multiple variables. The radar, the radio, the defense systems all converge on a single point: the need for an effective response. There is no direct visual confrontation. Modern warfare rarely presents itself in this way. Conflict occurs in technological layers, in invisible signals and decisions based on probabilities. Even so, the psychological impact is intense. The perception that a hostile intent exists somewhere beyond the reach of your eyes completely alters the flight experience. You execute defensive maneuvers as instructed, maintaining formation with the other fighters. Coordination between you doesn't depend on emotional trust, but on a deep technical understanding. Each pilot knows that an individual error can compromise the collective. Minutes that seem like hours pass before the situation stabilizes. The threat doesn't materialize into direct action, but the alert remains as a permanent reminder of the fragility of the balance. Command decides to end the mission prematurely. The priority now is to reassess the scenario, collect data, and prepare future responses. The return to base occurs in relative silence. There is no celebration nor frustration, only the awareness that the threshold between tension and confrontation has been crossed, even if briefly. Upon landing, you realize that something has definitively changed. It wasn't a fight in the traditional sense, but it was the first time that the concrete possibility of conflict ceased to be a distant concept. It became a tangible presence, integrated into their routine. You understand that, from this day forward, every mission will carry the weight of this experience. The unknown is no longer abstract. It now has form, even if invisible, and you continue flying, because that is the only possible direction. The early morning hours are still fresh when you awoken. There is no alarm, no dramatic announcement, just a firm knock on the barracks door and a short phrase. Early briefing, 10 minutes. The brain awakens before the body understands. This type of call doesn't happen routinely. The entire base seems to function at a different pace, faster, more restrained. The air carries a silent tension, as if everyone knows that something decisive is about to happen. But no one wants to verbalize the magnitude of the moment. In the briefing room, the lights are lower than usual. Digital maps occupy the entire front wall. The information doesn't arrive in a logical sequence. It accumulates like pieces of a puzzle that you need to assemble while already in motion. Reports indicate sudden changes in air defense patterns. Intercepted communications suggest increased operational readiness on the other side. No one uses the word combat, not directly, but the mission makes it clear that the line between patrol and confrontation has disappeared. You absorb the details with almost clinical concentration. Alternative routes, engagement protocols, geographical limits that now seem symbolic in the face of strategic urgency. The decision to fly today is not just an operational task. It's a turning point in your career as a pilot. Putting on your flight suit this morning feels different from all the other times. The pressurized fabric, the helmet, the weight of the equipment, everything takes on a broader meaning. They are not just safety instruments, they are physical reminders that you are about to enter an environment where the margin for error is practically non-existent. The walk to the aircraft takes place in collective silence. The distant sound of engines being tested creates a constant, almost hypnotic soundtrack. Technicians perform final checks with precise movements, avoiding any superfluous gesture. There is an implicit mutual trust. Each person here depends on the absolute competence of the other. When you enter the cockpit, the familiarity of the space doesn't bring immediate comfort. Instead, it intensifies the perception that every detail was designed for moments like this. You are not just piloting an aircraft. A survival system is operating in a scenario where decisions are measured in fractions of a second. Takeoff occurs under a sky that still carries traces of darkness. The line between night and dawn creates an indistinct horizon, reflecting the ambiguity of the mission itself. Formation with the other fighters is quickly established. You don't need words to understand what's at stake. Minutes after reaching the designated altitude, the first signs of activity appear on the sensors. They are not strident alarms, but gradual changes that indicate a more dynamic environment than expected. The radar shows multiple contacts at varying distances. Some move predictably, others do not. Communication with air traffic control becomes more intense. Each instruction is transmitted with precision, leaving no room for interpretation. You respond automatically, maintaining focus on technical parameters while emotional awareness tries to keep pace with the rhythm of events. Then, for the first time, the situation transcends the realm of operational theory. An alert system indicates a potentially hostile action. There is no time to deeply analyze the political or strategic implications. Training takes complete control. You execute maneuvers with a combination of technique and instinct. The body reacts to physical forces with trained resistance, while the mind maintains the necessary clarity to interpret each new piece of information. The sky, which minutes before seemed neutral, now transforms into a space charged with meaning. The confrontation is not visually dramatic. There is no cinematic narrative unfolding before your eyes. What exists is a sequence of critical decisions based on incomplete information. You act because you were prepared to act, not because you fully understand all the variables at play. When the threat diminishes and the mission is redirected for return, the predominant feeling is not victory. It is concentrated exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that manifests not only in the body, but in the perception that something irreversible has just happened. The landing occurs under a high sun, contrasting with the intensity of the previous hours. Upon shutting down the systems, you remain motionless for a few seconds, still mentally connected to the environment you have just left. Upon exiting the aircraft, the world seems slightly different. Everyday sounds take on an unexpected weight. Trivial conversations seem distant. You understand, with an almost uncomfortable clarity, that war has ceased to be an operational concept. It is now part of your professional and perhaps personal identity. There is no ceremony to mark this transition, only the continuation of missions, the routine that insists on moving forward. And you continue, knowing that each new flight will carry the echo of this first real confrontation. In the days that follow, nothing seems different, and that's what's most unsettling. The base continues to operate at the same methodical pace. Planes take off, return, are refueled, and prepared again. Reports are delivered, briefings take place, protocols are followed. The institutional machine doesn't slow down because a pilot crossed a psychological threshold. It simply continues. You realize that the greatest transformation doesn't occur at the moment of confrontation, but in the silent period that follows. There's a kind of internal reverberation that can't be measured by instruments. It manifests itself in small details, in the way you observe the horizon, in how quickly your body reacts to unexpected sounds, in how the silence of the night seems denser than before. Sleeping becomes a technical exercise. It's not exactly insomnia. It's an involuntary vigilance that persists even when you're exhausted. The mind revisits procedures, scenarios, possibilities. Not as explicit trauma, but as a constant attempt to reorganize the experience into something comprehensible. In the mess hall, conversations take place in a neutral tone. Pilots talk about maintenance, meteorology, flight statistics. No one directly mentions what happened. Not because it's forbidden, but because everyone understands that certain experiences lose clarity when verbalized. There's an implicit pact of normalcy. You begin to realize how modern warfare creates highly functional professionals in extremely high-pressure environments. Efficiency is valued above all else. Emotions aren't denied, but they are postponed. There's always another mission, another training, another responsibility waiting. During a routine flight days later, you notice that your perception has changed. The sky no longer seems like just an operational space. It carries layers of memory. Each air sector evokes a memory, a possibility, a consequence. The physical environment remains the same, but your relationship with it is profoundly transformed. Communication with your family becomes more complex, not because of explicit conflicts, but because of the distance between what you experience and what can be shared. Simple questions require carefully filtered answers. You talk about the weather, about routine, about generic aspects of the job. What remains unspoken is what truly defines your experience. This detachment isn't intentional, it's structural. It emerges from the need to protect those you love from a reality that cannot be fully translated into words. At the same time, you realize that this protection creates a subtle form of isolation. In the professional environment, trust between colleagues deepens, not through dramatic declarations, but through minimal gestures. A compassionate look after a difficult mission, a brief comment that indicates understanding without requiring explanations. These interactions build a silent support network, essential for operational continuity. You begin to recognize that the most significant transformation isn't related to technical skill. It's linked to how you process responsibility. Each in-flight decision carries additional weight, not as a paralyzing burden, but as an expanded awareness of the strategic and human implications involved. By reviewing recordings of previous missions, you observe your own behavior from an almost external perspective. You notice moments of hesitation that would have previously gone unnoticed. You analyze reaction patterns. You adjust procedures. Professionalism demands this constant self-criticism. Over time, the episode that marked your first confrontation ceases to be an isolated event. It integrates into a continuous sequence of experiences that define your trajectory. The initial emotional intensity gives way to a more stable form of understanding. It's not about indifference, it's about adaptation. You understand that a fighter pilot's career is not built solely on visible achievements. It is sustained by internal processes of psychological adjustment that are rarely publicly acknowledged. The ability to continue operating with clarity after critical events is as important as any maneuver executed at high speed. In a moment of pause, looking at the sky stretching beyond the runway, you realize that the war has left a mark that doesn't manifest in physical scars. It has altered your perception of time, of priority, of purpose. And even knowing that other missions will come, you understand that the true transformation has already occurred. You are no longer the pilot who took off for the first time full of expectations. Now, you are someone who has learned to coexist with the complexity of decisions that transcend the individual. The journey continues, not because you seek new challenges, but because the role demands constant presence. And this presence, built on experience and reflection, becomes the foundation of your professional identity. The promotion doesn't arrive with ceremony. It arrives with a new kind of silence. You don't immediately realize that something has changed. You still wear the same flight suit, still take the same route to the hangar, still perform the same pre-mission checks. But there's a subtle detail that alters the entire structure of your routine. Now there are people who observe your decisions as a reference. Being a leader in a combat squadron isn't a matter of formal authority. It's a matter of accumulated trust. Trust doesn't come from speeches, but from consistency. Each well-executed maneuver, each prudent choice, each safe return has built a reputation that now translates into collective responsibility. The new pilots arrive with the same energy you had years before. They carry enthusiasm, determination, and a still simplified view of what it means to fly in conflict zones. You observe them with a mixture of recognition and concern, not because you doubt their ability, but because you understand the inevitable transformation process that awaits them. The briefing takes on a different dimension when you're at the head table. Before, you absorbed instructions. Now, you translate these into operational guidelines. You need to consider not only the strategic objective, but also the individual characteristics of each team member. Who reacts best under pressure? Who needs more clarity in certain situations? Who tends to act impulsively? Leadership demands a form of attention that transcends technique. It requires human perception. You learn to identify minimal signs of emotional fatigue, overconfidence, and hesitation. Small details that may seem irrelevant in common contexts become decisive when operating in high-risk environments. During a particularly complex mission, this new responsibility manifests itself concretely. The operational scenario presents multiple unstable variables: active defense systems, intermittent communications, unexpected changes in weather conditions. Each pilot needs to make quick decisions, but the ultimate weight of coordination falls on you. The cockpit, once a space for introspection, becomes a center of dynamic management. You monitor not only your own parameters, but also the data transmitted by the other members of the team. Situational awareness needs to be broadened. It's not enough to guarantee your individual safety. It's necessary to maintain the integrity of the whole. At a certain point, a critical change arises. One of the younger pilots reports a technical anomaly that could compromise the continuity of the mission. The situation demands immediate evaluation. Continuing may represent unnecessary risk. Withdrawing the aircraft could impact the strategic objective. You make the decision based on incomplete information, as so often happens. You order the pilot to return, reorganize the formation, adjust the strategy. The mission continues, but with a different configuration. This type of choice will not be discussed publicly nor analyzed in detail outside operational circles. Still, you know it carries real consequences. After landing, the pilot who returned earlier approaches you. There is no resentment in his gaze, only a silent understanding that the decision was made with collective safety in mind. This moment confirms something you already suspected. Leadership in extreme contexts is built more on protection than on demonstrations of bravery. Over time, you realize that commanding other pilots profoundly alters your relationship with risk. Previously, danger was a personal experience. Now it's distributed across multiple, interconnected paths. Each mission is evaluated not only by its potential for success, but by the human impact involved. Nights become more reflective, not out of anxiety, but out of constant analysis. You revisit decisions, adjust approaches, project future scenarios. Accumulated experience transforms into a strategic resource that needs to be used with precision. Observing the squadron gathered after a day of intense operations, you recognize the complexity of the role you've assumed. It's not just about flying better or reacting faster, it's about creating conditions for everyone to return. This priority redefines the meaning of success. You understand then that the evolution from pilot to leader is not a linear progression. It's an expansion of perspective. The mission remains the same in essence, but the way you experience it is radically transformed. And as the distant sound of engines echoes through the base, you realize that the true test of competence lies not only in the ability to face risk, but in the capacity to manage it for the benefit of others. Years don't pass like dates on a calendar. They pass like invisible layers that settle upon your perception. You keep flying, mission after mission, exercise after exercise, deployment after deployment. In official reports, your career seems like an upward line, marked by efficiency, stability, and experience. But in lived reality, time is not linear. It is fragmented into intense memories, decisions made under pressure, moments of silence that no one but you can fully interpret. The base changes, commanders change, equipment evolves, new technologies are introduced with the promise of making everything more precise, safer, more controllable. Yet one element remains constant: human responsibility within increasingly complex systems. You begin to realize that modern warfare is not just a confrontation of physical forces. It is also a confrontation of psychological resilience. The ability to maintain mental clarity after years of exposure to high-tension scenarios becomes a skill as valued as technical prowess. At certain moments, during seemingly routine flights, your mind revisits episodes from the past without warning, not as traumatic memories, but as points of reference. You compare the pilot you were with the professional you have become. You notice subtle differences in how you interpret signals, how quickly you anticipate risks, and how you assess the impact of each decision. These changes are not perceptible to an outside observer. To many, you remain just an experienced officer performing your duties. However, internally, there is a growing awareness that your identity has been shaped by circumstances that few fully understand. The temporary return to civilian life during rest periods intensifies this perception. Common conversations seem out of place. Everyday problems are legitimate, but they resonate differently with someone accustomed to dealing with scenarios where the consequences are immediate and irreversible. You learn to adapt your language, to carefully select what you share. Not out of emotional detachment, but out of respect for contextual differences. Still, there is a recurring feeling that significant parts of your experience remain untranslated. In the squadron, new cycles continue. Young pilots arrive, bringing renewed perspectives. They see you as an example of stability, perhaps even invulnerability. You know this perception is incomplete. No professional operating in extreme environments remains untouched by accumulated experiences. In moments of reflection, you recognize that the greatest challenge was not facing immediate danger. It was integrating these experiences into your identity in a functional way. Continuing to operate efficiently while carrying the memory of critical decisions requires a specific type of resilience. Technology evolves, strategies adjust, geopolitical priorities transform. However, the human dimension of the service remains central. Each mission involves people with stories, expectations, and limitations. This understanding becomes clearer over the years. During a quiet night at the base, observing aircraft lined up under artificial lighting, you realize that time has altered your relationship with the future. Before, the horizon seemed a distant goal to be achieved. Now, it presents itself as a natural continuation of choices already made. The idea of legacy emerges discreetly, not out of personal ambition, but out of awareness that your journey has contributed to the training of other professionals, to the maintenance of a complex operational structure, and to the stability of contexts that are rarely fully understood. You understand that the identity built over these years cannot be summarized by titles or awards. It is inscribed in the way you react, decide, guide, and remain present in situations of high responsibility. And while the distant sound of an engine being tested pierces the night, you recognize that the journey was not just about flying in conflict scenarios. It was about learning to coexist with the intensity of experiences that redefine the meaning of service, purpose, and belonging. The announcement doesn't come as a shock. It arrives as confirmation of something you already knew, but never wanted to put into words. The operational time is coming to an end, not due to failure nor incapacity, simply because there is an invisible limit that defines how much the body and mind can sustain the same level of continuous demand. The system, which for years needed your constant presence, is now beginning to prepare the transition to new generations. In the first few days after this realization, you don't feel relief, you feel displacement. The routine that shaped your identity for so long begins to lose its centrality. Briefings continue to happen, but your participation becomes more consultative than executive. Missions are conducted by those you trained, you observe. And learning to observe is, in a way, more difficult than acting. The cockpit is still familiar, but each flight now carries an implicit sense of farewell. There is no officially scheduled last mission, just a sequence of operations that gradually become less frequent. The sky remains the same, but your relationship with it transforms. On one of those final flights, you notice something that would have previously gone unnoticed. The landscape below doesn't just look like a strategic backdrop. It looks like a collection of interconnected human stories. Cities, roads, distant lights. All of this existed while you operated in a parallel dimension of responsibility and decision-making. The awareness of this duality intensifies as the closure approaches. You begin to mentally organize not only procedures, but memories. Episodes that defined critical moments, people who shared risks, decisions that altered invisible trajectories. The disconnection doesn't happen in a single day. It's a gradual process of internal reconfiguration. The institution offers formal recognition, but the real adjustment happens far from ceremonies. It occurs in the silent intervals when you confront the inevitable question, who are you without the role you've held for so long? The answer doesn't come immediately. For years, professional and personal identities have been deeply intertwined. Separating them requires a different kind of discipline. A discipline focused not on operational performance, but on rebuilding purpose in a less defined context. Upon definitively returning to civilian life, you realize that the world continues to follow its own logic. Daily rhythms, common concerns, objectives that seem simple compared to the scenarios you faced. Adapting doesn't mean reducing the intensity of the past, but integrating it functionally into the present. In moments of reflection, you understand that service wasn't just a sequence of missions, it was a process of continuous transformation. War, seen from the outside, is often summarized by specific events. Experience from within, it's a series of psychological and ethical adjustments that redefine how the individual relates to responsibility, risk, and meaning. You begin to share your experience selectively, not as a heroic narrative, but as a source of learning. Young professionals in different areas find value in understanding how decisions under pressure can be structured with clarity. The legacy takes on a less visible, yet more lasting form. On an ordinary morning years later, you observe the sky without intending to cross it. It remains vast, indifferent to human trajectories. Yet, you feel a permanent connection to that space that shaped so much of your existence. Your career ended, but its influence remains, not as a paralyzing weight, but as a reference point. A constant reminder that choices made in critical moments have the capacity to redefine not only external events, but the very internal structure of those who make them. You understand then that the journey wasn't just about combat, technology, or strategy. It was about identity, about accepting a role that demanded total dedication, knowing that a return to normalcy would never be absolute. And as the day silently progresses, you realize that true closure isn't about ceasing to fly. It's about recognizing that the sky will continue to be a part of who you have become.